The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the busy city streets. It was a peaceful afternoon at the local public market, the air warm but not oppressive. Children ran around, their laughter echoing off the stone walls of the buildings. The soft strumming of a guitar floated through the air as a street musician played a simple melody. Nearby, an elderly couple strolled hand in hand, their smiles wide as they admired the colorful fruit stands. The market was alive with the energy of everyday life. People came and went, not expecting anything unusual. This was a place for relaxation, a place where families gathered, friends shared stories, and strangers exchanged polite nods. The kind of place where the weight of the world seemed to be left at the door. But among all the peaceful chatter and soft sounds, there was something different about this particular afternoon. On a bench near the heart of the market sat a calm older man. His face, though weathered with age, exuded a quiet strength. He was dressed in a simple gray jacket, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He wasn't here to draw attention to himself, but to simply enjoy the tranquility of the moment. The kind of man you could easily overlook, blending into the backdrop of the marketplace without a second thought. Yet, there was something magnetic about his presence, something that suggested he was no ordinary person. The air around him seemed to carry an unseen weight, as if his stillness masked a power that most could not fathom. As the moments passed, a disturbance slowly began to grow in the distance. It started with a loud voice, a man shouting at a vendor. Then the noise escalated faster, louder. People began to murmur, some of them turning their heads to look. Something wasn't right, and that's when it happened. A tall, aggressive figure, easily identifiable by his hostile posture and the angry scowl on his face, bumped into the older man on the bench. The impact was jarring, but the older man didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. The bully snapped, his voice harsh and taunting. "Watch where you're going, old man." The market's noise seemed to fade as all eyes turned to this new confrontation. Everyone waited for the older man to respond. But instead, he did something no one expected. He simply nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. Because one man was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The bully, a towering figure, towered over the older man sitting on the bench. His aggressive stance, hands clenched into fists, and the sneer on his face were all signs of a man looking for trouble. He wasn't looking to apologize or move on. He was looking to dominate, to intimidate. The younger man had already started causing a scene at the market, shouting at vendors and hurling insults at passersby. His disruptive energy was palpable, as if he thrived on the chaos he created. When he bumped into the older man on the bench, it wasn't just an accident. It was an opportunity for him to assert his dominance, to make a statement. His voice rang out with anger as he leaned in close, practically spitting with disdain. "Watch where you're going, old man," he barked, his words sharp and pointed, the volume carrying through the market. The crowd around them seemed to shrink, drawn into the confrontation, their attention now fully fixed on this strange dynamic. For a moment the older man didn't respond. His expression remained calm, unshaken by the aggressive behavior directed toward him. His eyes, though calm, held a quiet strength, a knowing that this moment was fleeting. He looked up slowly, meeting the bully's gaze without fear, without a hint of hesitation. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, like a gentle breeze cutting through the noise. "I'm sorry," the older man said, his voice steady, even apologetic. "It was my fault." The bully, expecting a different reaction, narrowed his eyes, taken aback by the older man's calmness. This wasn't the reaction he had anticipated. He wasn't used to his target staying composed under pressure. It unnerved him. He was used to intimidating, to getting the rise he wanted, and now, with this man, something wasn't adding up. But instead of backing off, the bully's frustration grew. He crossed his arms, his posture becoming even more hostile. The crowd around them shifted nervously, sensing the rising tension, but no one stepped in. Phones were pulled from pockets, their screens lighting up, capturing the moment as it unfolded. "You're apologizing," the bully sneered. "You think that'll fix anything? You're nothing but an old man, just a relic of the past. I bet you've never even seen a fight." The insults kept pouring out of his mouth, each one aimed to provoke. He took a step closer, practically towering over the older man, looking down on him with disdain. But the older man, still sitting calmly, didn't flinch. His hands remained folded in his lap, his posture relaxed. His eyes, though steady, flickered for just a second. There was a quiet understanding in them, as if he knew exactly what this moment would lead to. The people around them began to murmur, some still recording, others unsure of what to do. The atmosphere in the market had shifted. The once peaceful environment now buzzed with the electricity of an impending clash. But despite the growing tension, Steven Seagal's character sat unfazed, his calmness like an anchor in the middle of a storm. It was this unflappable nature that drew the crowd in, as if they were witnessing something more than just a confrontation. There was something different about the older man, something that seemed to transcend the typical back and forth of an argument. It wasn't just a battle of words, it felt like a battle of worlds. The bully was shouting, demanding respect with force, while the older man commanded it with silence. As the insults grew harsher, the older man, Steven Seagal's character, leaned back slightly, not in submission but in quiet understanding. "I tried to stop you," he said, his voice even, almost peaceful. "Not for me, but for you." The bully looked even more confused now. What was this man talking about? He thought he had the upper hand, but something about his calm response made him uneasy. The crowd noticed it too, something in the older man's voice, something in the way he spoke, made them question who this person really was. Was he just an old man, or was he someone else entirely? As the seconds passed, the tension reached its peak. The bully was beginning to lose control of the situation. And it was only a matter of time before he took it further, but the older man's calmness suggested something the crowd hadn't fully understood yet. The silence between them stretched long enough for everyone watching to feel the weight of it. Then the bully crossed a line he could never uncross. The bully's voice was like a bullhorn, and the insults grew sharper with every word. He wasn't just challenging the older man anymore. He was trying to break him, to force him to react. "What's wrong, old man? Are you too scared to fight back?" he taunted, his words filled with venom. The crowd had started to gather. Their curious glances turned into focused stares, with phones raised high to record every moment. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was a spectacle. People had begun to murmur, speculating about who this calm man was, wondering if he was going to finally lose his temper. Some were rooting for the bully, others for the older man, but all were hooked. The energy in the air was thick with anticipation. But through all the noise, Steven Seagal's character remained an island of calm. He didn't react to the verbal barrage. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his posture, didn't even seem to blink. He sat there with his hands folded, looking up at the bully with an almost serene expression. His gaze was steady, his eyes locked on the bully's with the kind of calmness that made the young man feel more and more uncomfortable. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something else, something more profound, and that's what unnerved him. The bully continued to pace, his anger building as he struggled to provoke a reaction. His words became more personal, each one designed to cut deeper. "What, do you think you're some kind of tough guy, huh? Just because you're sitting here like a monk doesn't mean you've got any strength left in you. You're nothing but a washed-up has-been. A joke." Still, there was no response from the older man. Not a flinch. Not a word. Just that steady gaze that seemed to pierce through him. The crowd began to sense that this wasn't a typical situation. The dynamic had shifted. People were no longer just observing an argument between two men. They were witnessing something much more complex. It wasn't the bully who held the power here. It was the calmness of the older man, and that was far more unsettling than any outburst of anger could have been. The bully, realizing he wasn't getting the response he expected, grew more aggressive. He leaned in closer, towering over the older man, his fists clenching tighter at his sides. "I'll make you regret this," he growled, the threat hanging heavy in the air. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" Steven Seagal's character finally spoke again, his voice still low and steady, almost a whisper amidst the rising tension. "I'm not here to fight you," he said, his tone still filled with an almost eerie calm. "I'm not the one who wants to fight." For a split second, the bully froze. The words hit him harder than any punch ever could. The older man wasn't intimidated by him. He wasn't even afraid of him. And for the first time in the entire exchange, the bully hesitated. This wasn't the reaction he had prepared for. People didn't stay calm when they were insulted. They fought back. They raised their voices. They tried to prove themselves. But this man, he wasn't following any of those rules. Then, as if to prove a point, the bully reached down and grabbed the older man's arm, shaking it roughly. "Listen here, old man," he snarled. "I'm trying to help you. You're about to learn that no one's going to let you sit here in peace. You think this is your world, but you're in my world now." The crowd gasped. Some of them wanted to step in, to stop it before it went too far, but no one moved. It was like the crowd was frozen in place, trapped by the unfolding drama. They were spectators in something they didn't fully understand yet. No one had stepped forward to help the older man, but no one had supported the bully either. And still, Steven Seagal's character didn't resist. His body remained relaxed, unmoved by the aggression. But his voice, when it came, held a quiet authority that made the bully take a step back. "I've tried to stop you," the older man said softly, his words clear but not loud, still without anger. "Not for me, but for you." The bully's face twisted with confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about?" he spat. He was too angry to think clearly, and the older man's calmness only fueled his rage. But something was different. The crowd could feel it. The way the older man spoke wasn't just about avoiding confrontation. It was about something deeper, something the bully couldn't understand. The people around them started to murmur again, this time with more uncertainty. This man wasn't just some defenseless old guy. He was something else entirely, and they were beginning to realize it. The bully was now pacing in circles, his words growing even more heated. "You really think you can talk to me like that?" he shouted. "What, you think you're better than me?" And that's when he crossed the line. The older man's stillness wasn't a sign of weakness. No one understood that yet, not even the bully. It was a power he wielded that was so subtle it was almost invisible. But now the crowd was beginning to sense it. His calmness wasn't out of fear, it was a statement. And the bully's aggression, his insults, his attempts to dominate, they were all meaningless against it. Then the bully crossed a line he could never uncross. "Do you think staying calm in a heated moment shows real strength? Let us know what you think in the comments below." The bully's face was contorted with rage, his fists trembling at his sides as he glared down at the calm older man. The insults were no longer just about words, they were becoming a personal vendetta. Every breath the bully took seemed to add more fuel to the fire. His whole body shook with the need to prove himself, to show the crowd that he wasn't to be challenged or humiliated. And in that moment, with his pride on the line, he made a choice that would change everything. The older man's gaze remained steady, but the energy around him began to shift. It wasn't in his body language, which was still relaxed, nor in his facial expression, which remained unchanged. It was in the air. The moment felt pregnant with tension, as though the entire market had stopped moving, holding its breath. Time seemed to stretch, every second heavier than the one before. "Nuff." The bully's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. He lunged forward, his hand moving so fast it seemed like a blur. The crowd gasped in unison, their eyes widening in disbelief as the bully's palm collided with the older man's cheek. The slap rang out through the market like a thunderclap, echoing off the walls and causing a ripple of shock through the onlookers. The sound was loud, sharp, unmistakable. And then there was silence. For a brief, agonizing moment, no one moved. The air was thick with disbelief. The market, once bustling with life and noise, was now frozen in time. All eyes were on the older man, on Steven Seagal's character. The bully stepped back, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling in quick succession. His eyes were wide, full of a strange mix of satisfaction and confusion. He had slapped the older man. He had finally gotten the reaction he wanted. Or so he thought. But something was different. The older man didn't even flinch. Where the crowd had expected anger, frustration, or perhaps a sudden outburst, they were met with something far more unsettling, complete calm. The older man's hand slowly reached up to his cheek, where the slap had landed. His expression was as peaceful as it had been before, almost like he hadn't even felt the impact of the blow. For a second, it looked like he was going to say something, maybe speak some final words that would end the confrontation. But instead, he just sat there, still, the silence stretching between them. The bully, though visibly shaken, smirked as though the slap had given him a temporary victory. He turned around to face the crowd, his arms raised in a display of triumph. "See that?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when you mess with me." But the crowd didn't respond the way he expected. The murmurs of the audience had faded, replaced with a strange tension that filled the air. Some people looked uncomfortable, others confused, but no one seemed to be cheering the bully's victory. Instead, there was something heavier in the air, an unease that had begun to settle over the market like a dark cloud. The older man remained completely still. His face was as stoic as ever, but the crowd was no longer focused on him in the same way they had been before. They weren't waiting for him to react. They were waiting for something else. Something that hadn't come yet, but seemed inevitable. Is that it? The bully spat, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked at the crowd, expecting someone to applaud his display of power, but no one did. There was no support. Just the oppressive weight of silence. Come on, old man. Show me something. Still, Steven Seagal's character didn't move. He didn't even stand up from the bench. But there was something in the way he held himself that made the bully hesitate. Something in his calmness that was far more dangerous than any outburst of anger could have been. The crowd, who had previously been uncertain, now found themselves watching with a strange mixture of awe and fear. They had no idea what was going to happen next, but they knew one thing for certain: the moment had shifted. The old man's reaction, or lack of one, was more powerful than any physical blow. And now, the bully was starting to realize it too. The older man's voice, when it finally came, was quiet but firm, cutting through the thick silence like a blade. "I tried to stop you," he said, his words calm and measured. "Not for me, but for you." The bully didn't seem to understand. His smirk faltered for a second, and his eyes flickered with uncertainty. This wasn't the reaction he had been expecting, and in that moment, he began to wonder if he had made a grave mistake. But the doubt was brief, swallowed quickly by his anger and pride. "You're still talking, old man." The bully's voice trembled with frustration. "You're not even going to fight back." His words were desperate now, a last-ditch attempt to salvage what was left of his pride. But there was no fight coming, no defense, nothing but stillness. The older man's response was a simple, "I told you." But the man didn't react the way anyone expected. The bully stood there, his chest still heaving from the outburst, expecting the crowd to cheer him on. But the only sound was the muffled hum of the market, the distant clinking of coins, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. The silence between them had grown unnerving, but not in the way the bully thought it would. It was a quiet that felt charged, like the calm before a storm. People were still watching, some uncertain, others fascinated by the older man's composure. But there was no doubt anymore something about him didn't add up. His calm wasn't weakness. It wasn't surrender. It was something else entirely. Something deeper. And the longer the bully stood there, the more he began to feel it too. The older man's eyes slowly drifted from the bully's face to the crowd around them, catching the gaze of a few onlookers. There was no fear in those eyes, no panic. Just that same stillness. That calm demeanor that felt like it was designed to shake you to your core. And then, with almost unbearable slowness, he spoke again. "I tried to stop you," he said, his voice soft but clear, a quiet warning in the midst of the chaos. "Not for me, but for you." The words felt like they had weight, like they weren't just a response to the bully's insults, but a message. Something more profound, something the crowd wasn't picking up on yet. There was an air of finality in his voice, a sense that this wasn't just a random encounter. It was deliberate, and that sense of purpose only deepened the mystery of who this man really was. The bully blinked, his mind struggling to process the words. He had expected anger, a fight, a physical confrontation. He had slapped the older man, humiliated him, and yet there was no sign of fear, nothing. The older man wasn't reacting the way anyone expected. This wasn't normal. The crowd seemed to sense it too. Phones lowered, eyes narrowed in curiosity. Whispers spread through the group like wildfire. Who was this man? The elderly man who had just been slapped in public, who was taking the abuse without so much as a blink, now appeared like a riddle, an enigma that no one could figure out. The bully, his frustration boiling over, stepped forward again, his posture threatening, his fist still clenched. "What do you mean for me, old man?" he growled, trying to sound menacing, but there was a tremor in his voice now, something that suggested he wasn't so sure anymore. "What's your game, huh? Why are you just sitting there?" The older man tilted his head slightly, looking at the bully with the same calmness he had carried throughout the entire interaction. His voice remained as steady as ever. "You don't understand." His gaze never wavered. "But you will. Soon." The crowd was on edge. Some were edging closer, others taking a step back. The once indifferent onlookers now found themselves tangled in the web of this confrontation, trying to read between the lines, to figure out what exactly was happening. The bully's face contorted with anger, his fists trembling as his frustration mounted. He was so sure of his power, so certain that with one slap, he had asserted his dominance. But the older man's silence, his unshaken stillness, was breaking him. The atmosphere around them was charged, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. And for the first time, the bully felt a twinge of doubt. Was he in control? Was he the one who had the upper hand in this situation? Or had he underestimated this older man far more than he realized? A slight rustle in the distance caught the bully's attention, and for just a moment, he looked away from the older man. It was a subtle movement, just enough to break his concentration. But in that brief second, everything changed. The sound of an engine grew louder in the distance. At first it was faint, almost unnoticeable. But then it grew steadily louder, powerful. Low-sounding engines that turned heads, that snapped the crowd's attention from the heated confrontation to something else entirely. The first black SUV pulled into the market, its sleek exterior glinting in the sunlight. The sound of tires scraping the gravel intensified. Another SUV followed, then another. The vehicles pulled up to the edge of the crowd, the engines cutting off in unison. The rumble of the engines slowly died out, and the market fell into an eerie silence. Everyone now fully aware that something important was unfolding. The doors of the SUVs swung open, and men in dark suits emerged, their movements sharp, purposeful. They weren't just any men. They moved with an authority that was impossible to ignore. Their presence filled the space, and the crowd parted as the men walked toward the older man. It wasn't fear in their eyes, but something else, something more akin to respect. Then, one of the men, taller than the others, walked up to the older man and stopped. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a crisp suit, his hair neatly styled. As he stepped forward, he glanced briefly at the bully, his expression unreadable. And then he turned his attention back to the older man. He looked down at the older man with a mixture of concern and reverence. "Dad, are you okay?" The words hung in the air like a bombshell. The bully froze, his mouth agape. His whole body went rigid as he processed what he had just heard. The older man was not just anyone. He wasn't a simple bystander, or an elderly man to be pushed around. The crowd, which had once been divided between curiosity and confusion, now buzzed with whispers. The real story was unfolding in front of them, and they hadn't even known who they were looking at until now. The man in the suit wasn't just any stranger. He was someone important. And the man he was speaking to was no ordinary old man. And that's when it hit the bully. He had slapped the wrong person. This wasn't just some peaceful market goer. This was someone far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. That's when the bully realized who he had slapped. You think actions always have consequences, no matter how small they seem? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tension in the market was palpable. The crowd had gone completely silent. What was once a lively scene was now frozen in time. Every single person holding their breath as the events unfolded before their eyes. The black SUVs that had pulled into the market lot still stood there, their doors wide open, the federal agent's presence unmistakable. The older man, who had been subjected to the bully's taunts and slap, was now the center of attention, but not in the way anyone had expected. The man in the suit, the one who had stepped forward, turned to face the crowd with a calmness that mirrored the older man's. He looked back at his team of agents, a subtle nod signaling them to secure the area. The agents moved swiftly, their professional demeanor adding weight to the moment. No one dared to approach. They stood still, eyes glued to the unfolding drama, but no one dared to intervene. The man in the suit looked down at the older man with a soft expression. His voice, when it came, was filled with genuine concern. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked again, the words seeming to linger in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The crowd could hardly believe what they had just heard. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as their eyes darted from one to the other, trying to process what had just been revealed. The older man wasn't just anyone. He wasn't some frail, forgotten man. He wasn't just a retired soldier or an old fighter. No, he was someone of immense importance. This wasn't just an isolated market confrontation. This was something much bigger. The bully, who had been puffing out his chest moments ago, now looked utterly deflated, his face drained of color, and his mouth hung open in disbelief. The realization was slow, but once it hit, it was like a hammer to his pride. The man he had so casually slapped, treated with such disdain, was someone who commanded respect. Someone who had the power to crush him with nothing but a look. The federal agent in the suit stepped forward, his gaze locking with the bully's. The crowd sensed the shift in power, the moment the dynamics changed. The bully had no idea who he had been messing with, but now it was clear. This was a man beyond the reach of his petty aggression. The agent's words, when they came, were calm and measured, but their impact was like a jolt to the system. "You just slapped the wrong man, my friend," he said, his voice low but firm, as if the weight of his words was enough to shake the bully to his core. The older man, Steven Seagal's character, didn't react. He didn't need to. The agent spoke for him, and his presence alone was enough to send a chill down the bully's spine. The agent looked back at the older man and asked, "Dad, do you want me to take it from here?" The older man nodded silently, his calm demeanor unwavering. The situation had turned from a simple market confrontation into something much larger, and now it was in the hands of the federal agents. The agent turned to the bully, his gaze cold. "You've just made a huge mistake, and you'll regret this for the rest of your life." His voice was steady, and his words cut through the tension like a sharp blade. The bully tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. There was nothing he could say. No excuses, no justification. The older man remained still, his face impassive, like a statue carved from stone. He wasn't interested in revenge. He wasn't even interested in the bully's punishment. He had already made his point. He had stayed calm, endured the insults and the slap, and now, without a word, his son and the federal agents were here to take care of the situation. As the agents closed in, the bully stumbled backward, his knees trembling, his hands raised in some desperate attempt to shield himself from the consequences of his actions. But it was too late. The agents were efficient, grabbing him by the arms and pulling him away. There was no fight left in him. He had no strength to argue, no defense to offer. He had thought he could humiliate an old man in the middle of a crowded market, but now, as the agents hauled him away, the weight of his actions hit him with crushing force. As the agents led the bully away, the crowd stood in stunned silence. No one knew exactly what to do. They had all witnessed something far beyond their expectations, something that seemed almost cinematic in its unfolding. The old man, who had been slapped in front of them, was now revealed to be a man of incredible power, and the consequences of the bully's actions were unfolding before their eyes. Steven Seagal's character finally stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't need to make a spectacle of it. He didn't need to bask in the drama of the situation. His quiet strength had spoken volumes, and it was clear to everyone watching that he didn't need to engage in petty conflict. He had already won. The agents, once they had secured the bully and ushered him away, turned their attention back to the older man. "We'll handle it from here," one of them said, his voice respectful but tinged with awe. They knew who he was now. They knew the man they had just escorted was someone who commanded the highest level of respect. The older man nodded once, his face still serene, as if he had simply been following a path he was destined to walk. The crowd, still stunned, began to disperse slowly. Some whispered to each other, sharing their amazement at what they had just witnessed. Others looked at the older man with new eyes, their previous judgments replaced by reverence. That's when the bully realized who he had slapped. The scene had come to a quiet close. The federal agents had taken the bully away, and the crowd, now slowly dissipating, was left in stunned silence. The market, once filled with noise and energy, had transformed into a place of reflection where the tension had finally broken. The confrontation had ended, but the lesson lingered in the air, thick and undeniable. Steven Seagal's character remained where he stood, his expression unchanged. His calmness, the way he had handled the entire situation, was a lesson in itself. He had been slapped, insulted, disrespected, and yet he had remained unfazed, never raising his voice, never showing the bully any of the anger he had so desperately wanted. His restraint had made all the difference. It had been the key to his strength and to his power. The agent who had stepped forward earlier walked up to him, still wearing that same respectful look. "Dad," he said, his voice softer now, filled with admiration. "You handled that better than anyone ever could." The older man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His face, though calm and collected, showed no signs of bitterness or regret. "I didn't do it for me," he said, his voice still steady. "I did it for him, for the bully." The agent raised an eyebrow, confused for a moment, but the older man continued. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low, "the greatest strength lies in holding back, in choosing not to retaliate, even when you're pushed to the edge. You show people who you really are, not through your fists, but through your ability to remain calm in the face of adversity. You teach them something far more important than any punch you could throw." The agent, understanding now, nodded thoughtfully. He respected his father more than words could express. He had always known his father was a man of wisdom, but now, Seeing it in action, he understood the depth of that wisdom. Around them, the last few people lingered, their phones still in hand, but their eyes focused now on the older man with a new sense of respect. They had witnessed something extraordinary, not just an incident, but a display of character. The bully may have thought he was winning by slapping the older man, but in reality, it was the older man who had triumphed. He had shown everyone what true strength looked like, not in violence, but in restraint. The older man turned to the crowd for the first time, his eyes scanning the people who had witnessed everything. There were no words of anger, no gestures of victory. Instead, he simply said, "Respect should never depend on who someone is. It should be given because they are human." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had just endured. The crowd, once unsure and confused, now understood. This wasn't just a random fight. It wasn't even about the slap. It was about respect. The kind of respect that transcends age, position, or any superficial differences. It was about recognizing the humanity in others, no matter what they looked like, how old they were, or where they came from. And with that final lesson hanging in the air, the older man turned and began to walk away, his son following close behind. There was no need for applause, no need for recognition. The lesson had been learned, and that was enough. The crowd, however, could not let the moment pass without acknowledging it. Slowly, they began to clap. It was a hesitant applause at first, but then, as the truth of the moment settled in, it grew louder. A small gesture of respect for the man who had just taught them all a powerful lesson. A lesson about strength, dignity, and the power of choosing peace over violence. As the sound of applause echoed in the market, the older man and his son disappeared into the distance, leaving the crowd behind, forever changed by what they had witnessed.